So Paul has given us in 2 months two books that were kind of came as a pair. One was Baseball in Blue and Gray, which is George Hersh's book about the Civil War era of baseball in America, the American Civil War era. And it doesn't only include information about baseball as it pertained to the Union or Confederate armies, but also talks about the other things that happened within baseball within those years. And that was very, very informative in my mind. Then he came up with the idea of, like he had in the past, of doing a novel. And he chose a baseball novel by the name of Play for a Kingdom by Thomas. Is it Dyja? Or do you know if it is? I don't know
I
how.
always said Dyja, but I don't know if that's
Dyja.
right.
How about you, Bob?
It's been a long time since I spoke with him, but Daya is what I've always done.
Dyja, is how he said it. I wasn't sure. But anyway, the book comes with all kinds of awards and recognition and so forth and so on as a first-time novel, which is almost incredible to read. Incredible to read. I I was a veteran of the war myself, and I just was reading about the Civil War. I'm glad I wasn't in that war because it was probably the first war really fought with modern weapons. I know it always had fascinated Winston Churchill when he was, I think, Lord Admiral or something during the First World War in England. And he was like somewhat of a historian of the American Civil War because he saw it as the progression, of modern warfare, and it is kind of amazing. And he weaves into this story uh, many, many things. And what I really was impressed with was the fact that a lot of stuff that I read, even currently, in American history of that era, of that Civil War era, of that pre-Civil War and post-Civil War era, it's a very large reflection on the characters in the book and, what they were thinking and saying and how they felt about certain issues and so forth, both Union and Confederate. And it very closely mirrors what people are writing about today. So it's a very, very interesting book in that regard. And Paul, I'm not going to belabor this. I'm just going to turn it over to you. And it certainly was a very, very, very interesting pick.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, I appreciate it. So, Bob, you mentioned that you'd interviewed the author, and he's a Civil War reenactor. So a little bit on this book for me. I read this book about 20 years ago when it first came out, and I remember snippets of it, but I read it more for I was like, this is a really interesting thing. But I think as I reread it, I really dove into it much deeper, for lack of a better word. I mentioned a few moments ago, I think we're gonna require a little bit more on audience participation this go around. I was engaged in the book. I was absolutely sucked in, and I didn't take a lot of notes, which is odd for me. Usually I take about a page of notes, and I didn't. But I just was sucked into the story. So, with that being said, I thought it was interesting to do these two books back to back. We have Baseball in Blue and Gray, which is the true history, which is really what happened and how it played out and how baseball was on the home front, how baseball was in the war front. And then we have this story of the 14th Brooklyn going through the last vestiges of the Civil War in wilderness, Spotsylvania. And this also reminded me, I'm actually watching, if anyone has watched this, I'm watching Masters of the Air on Apple TV, where they're counting down to their 25 missions. And these guys are counting down and, we're out of here in 10 days, 9 days, whatever. And it's really interesting in a lot of ways how these characters, in my opinion, over these, I would say a month and a half period, really change and honestly mature throughout the book. So, I mean, we could certainly talk about the characters. A couple of things I'll just kind of throw it out there to start with is that, I mean, I think this might be one of my new favorite Civil War books. I judge all Civil War books, especially novels, against the Killer Angels. I've read the Killer Angels probably 5 or 6 times. I love the Killer Angels. Seen the movie, The Killer Angels. I've always said you could smell the coffee, you can hear the gunpowder. And to kind of piggyback on what you said, Peter, when I read the book, especially the scenes at the Bloody Angle at Spotsylvania, I felt my stomach churning, like watching that and thinking about that, and the scenes where they're in the medical tent and what he's doing and how they're doing this. It was some of the most visceral, descriptive writing I've read in a very long time. So, and I think it's really interesting for me is that it just got, second half of the book for me got really gritty, really deep, really gritty. These scenes, and it's a real interesting contrast to the earlier part of the book where we have, the scene when they first step into this beautiful pastoral field where they're going to play baseball. So I don't know if anybody wants to elaborate or kind of talk a little bit about what their thoughts were on some of those ideas, or, just the book as a whole. You're muted, Peter.
You can read it on so many different levels. Of course, you have the Civil War itself. You have the two competing armies, engage with each other in a very famous battle of the Civil War. I was stationed down in Virginia for a while when I was in the service myself. And it was, that area of Virginia is, was kind of known for that battle, the Wilderness. And so yeah, you had that going on. And then you had him juggling 24 different personalities, which was like absolutely incredible to me. I could, I was having difficulty for a while keeping up with that. If it had any criticism, it might be just that there were so many people that he kind of went into some great detail about their personalities and about their interactions with one another and so forth and so on. And that didn't even touch on the other side yet, the Confederate side. So just the interplay among the Union soldiers in the company, that L company, I found to be rather remarkable. I'd like I say, aside from the, and he also captured not just the absolute terror of that close-in fighting and so forth that went on, but there's always a share of that in wars. I was in an infantry, the Marine Corps infantry, and it was you had a, but that was just a little tiny bit of your time, really, if you added it all up. It was enough. If you added it up, it wasn't. But what you did have instead were days upon days upon days of hard living. Living in very adverse conditions, living while you're sick, living while you're tired, living while you're hungry. And he captured all of that right to the letter. And of course, I mean, I was in a modern military unit. You just can only imagine what they had. Just to be wounded was nearly fatal because of just the disease and everything that accompanied it.
That was phenomenal to talk about that, Peter, where you hear about it so much and you read about it in the history books, but then he talks about, like, the surgeon's reaching in there and wiggling around and finding the Minet ball. And, he's got the bloody knife in his teeth and puts down and he's picking it back up. And his smock is half covered in blood. It's just, I almost felt like it was in a time machine when I went back into this and just looked at just the descriptive writing was phenomenal. So, Bob, do you remember when you chatted with with Thomas? I know he's a reenactor, but did he talk about any of his research or anything that you recall? I know it's been a fair bit of time, but any thoughts on that?
The talk I had with him was when he received the Casey Award that night. Always, if you ever get to Cincinnati in January, a questionable call, but I only live 90 miles away, but always a good time. But nevertheless, he was a very quiet guy because it was his first novel, and he had been a literary agent, and he had done like a dozen different things in the publishing industry. He had promoted books, he had edited all sorts of things. And this was the first time he had written something, and he didn't have a real grasp on the baseball side, but he did seem to understand the battle side. And it is quite graphic, and it's how many books have we read on the history of those things about how terrible it was to be in battle during the Civil War. And the one book where you were just talking about the field hospital situation, you want to talk about a bloody book, go read the original MASH. They do the same sort of thing. They call it meatball surgery, but it's just really graphic.
Yeah.
I can add a little bit to that too, because I was concerned a lot about the research that he had done. And what was uncanny was that I'm sure he didn't use the same resources, it was all the same, but the local Civil War regiment from my town was at the same battles that he was portraying, such as Wilderness, Spotsylvania, the Bloody Angle, the Mule Shoe, and all that. And so I looked it up on that particular, the book on there, and this is just a short paragraph just to show how he captured it also. But what they were saying at Wilderness, there were spine-chilling, unnerving sounds coming from the burning wilderness, the screams and yells from the wounded men, both north and south, as they were consumed by fire, were terrifying sounds. The sickening odor of burning flesh permeated the air. Men attempted to carry or drag the wounded from the flames, but only so much could be done. Shots could be heard by the wounded that could not be reached as they took their own lives rather than be painfully consumed in the flames. This was an anguished finish to end the wilderness battle. So he did use a lot of that. He didn't get quite that deep into it, but obviously he was reading some of the same history. So I think he really did spend a lot of time trying to get the battle scenes right. And the thing is, though, he couldn't spend as much time on that aspect of it because he had to get back to those baseball games and all that. I mean, this was just part of it. And then it was kind of like the opposite of the battles. And now you have something civilized that they're doing, which I thought was an interesting contrast. And also I had quite a bit of fun with all of the Latin. I don't know how many of you others spent any time translating the Latin. Some of it I could figure out pretty easily, but I did use my translator app and everything to get through it. And it was very beneficial to do that. I thought it was really kind of a nice touch to it. So I was wondering whether the author himself also had sort of this penchant for Latin. I don't know if he got somebody to write that part for him or whether he actually knew it. I don't know. But I thought that was kind of an interesting portion of it. And one thing I did question right at the very beginning is, how did they keep that ball white?
Well, it's actually interesting, Joanne. As he mentions the ball several times throughout. Like the
Yes,
first
yeah,
time he mentions it, it's a white,
White
it's, you know,
ball,
what we
yeah.
call as a pearl, right? And
right,
then he
yes,
talks about the first match and he's like, now there's scrapes on it. And then he talks at before
Yeah.
the last match, it's sitting on
right.
this pedestal, you
right.
know, and it's so funny to me because I mean, I could see it like this is one of my vintage
Yes,
balls. This thing
exactly.
used to be
Yeah, yeah.
white, you know, it's sitting here in
right.
front of my desk.
And I know
So
that's picayune, I know that's kind of,
no,
but I think there was also something symbolic about the clean, pure ball at the beginning becoming muddied all the way along. I think there was a little bit of symbolism in that as well.
well,
And
remember, just to kind of play a little bit off that as well. What's interesting is originally they were playing for the ball. I mean, like a normal, you know,
Mhm.
1860s match, you would play for the ball.
right,
Then, you know, it was like then it started to be, well, are we playing for the ball? Then we're playing for our freedom, and then we're playing for a kingdom, as we
Mhm.
as the title of the book.
right.
You know, and I did that's I was a little I don't know. I reread it again at the end, and we could talk about it a little bit later or now, but I was kind of like, oh wow, the Union came back and they won, and then wait, the Confederates walked away anyway.
Right, yeah,
So
I know,
it
right,
was,
yeah.
darn it.
Yeah.
But it was yeah, it was really interesting. So
Yeah.
does
Excuse me, Brian, you have a comment on this?
Oh yeah, thanks for having me.
I
I'm
am so
relatively
sorry I missed
Oh,
your
no,
hand, sir.
yeah, we got into it.
I'm relatively new to SABR, first virtual book club, so thanks for having me. I was going to make a comment similar to Joanne and ask a question. I wonder what everyone felt about I'm not a war expert, so I don't know the accuracy of the war descriptions, but it certainly, like everyone's saying, certainly made you feel like you were there. But wondering what everyone felt about the accuracy of the baseball side of things. Yeah, I pictured a browned lemon peel ball, and as we were discussing it, it was white. They got dirtier and dirtier. And in my head, he never really indicated it, but in my head, I had him overhead pitching when I knew they wouldn't be doing that then. So I was wondering what folks thought about his accuracy on the descriptions of the baseball game and how well he did or didn't capture that.
I can throw my couple. I had this on my notes. I'll throw this out real quick and then I will throw it to everybody else. And I'm taking just for my own research, and I'm also a very Brian, I'm a very serious vintage ball player too. So with that being said, I mean, I feel like he was, there were a lot of things where he was there, where he was like the game accounts, where he was writing the game accounts. I thought that was very good. Like he did this, he did that, and he made a comment somewhere in there about, hey, he slid. This is a new thing. And it was kind of a new thing. He slid. But I think there were a few things where it was still like he wasn't quite sure. They talking about the snap ball and the speed ball. That I assume, I understand that I'm sure they did things like that, but by definition, in 1850 and 1860, the job of the pitcher or hurler was to deliver a hittable pitch. So, and it wasn't to strike him out so much, it was to put the ball in play. So there was that. And then the other thing is he talked multiple times about a home run. Well, in that day and age and in vintage baseball, a home run is as fast as you can run around the bases. So there's no true home run. He was kind of like, he made this comment about, oh, he hit it off the bat and he knew it was gone. Where's it going? Like there's no, you're running. I've played vintage ball for like 13 years. I have 2. So, there's not a lot of home runs. So, I mean, those are the things that I picked up that I actually wrote this down, that the baseball scenes were good. They weren't accurate home run snap balls. So I will throw that out to the other folks. Sorry, the wife is making dinner and
How
that
dare
was the
you?
dishes. But
Well-
anyway, I'll throw out to the other folks.
One note, perhaps, if you read some of the reviews of the book back when it first came out, they were almost universally from the Civil War point of view.
Oh.
They would mention baseball, that the Alabama would first came through the woods after, while they were trying to set up their game, and somehow they got into a friendly game. But they took 2 points of view. One, the purists said there was no Company L in Alabama. There was you didn't have any situation like this described. And the others say it's fiction. And I'm willing to give them a little leeway when you're writing, particularly your first fiction. And they were all, but they were always complimentary about the character development.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
certainly seemed a lot further nuanced in the life of Civil War soldiers, meaning, their life, in the field, what they ate, how they slept, how they stayed, their uniforming, their equipment. He seemed very, very on board with that, understanding all of that, all those little subtle things. And then, but I also did find like the actual play of the game to be, not as nuanced. You know what I mean? It was just, he was saying some things that, what did that mean? But he had the basics down. It was enough to keep you interested, of course, and I became more interested in, well, how were these games going to conclude? That became my primary interest, not the nuance of the play.
Think I'll throw it out there too. What baseball to me in this, it was interesting because I read it as a baseball book, but I read it as a history book or a Civil War book as well. And it's basically what I saw of it is the baseball was there and they looked forward to doing this. It was like we talked about in the previous book. This was, what we did on picket. This is how we exercised. This is what we did. Now they look forward to it. But what I think was really interesting is a couple comments on characters and characterization. First of all, he used the baseball to humanize the South, which I think was really interesting. There were multiple times where they went throughout and they're like, oh, I hope he's not dead. I hope we didn't kill him, or I saw him over there. And there was a scene where two of the protagonists, that I'm drawing an absolute blank because there are so many characters. I'll talk about that in a moment. But where they're like, oh, I saw him. He was there, and I turned and I killed this guy, and he killed this guy instead. So he used it to humanize, baseball is what's bringing them together, but it's also bringing them back. And he talks about them as we're all Americans, we're all brothers, and it's all that, we want it. And even in the end of the book, where he's very much of they have the option to not go on picket. They have the option to literally sit it out. It's interesting in a lot of ways. It's very Ted Williams-esque, if you will. And, do you want to take that last few swings? No, you were going to go play. We know what's going to happen. We're going to play. So I just wanted to piggyback that real quick on a couple comments about characters and characterization. I agree with you, Peter. I swear I felt like this was almost like reading Game of Thrones, where I'm like, or the Bible. It's like he who begat who begat who. I felt like I needed crib notes on who was what and who did what, which was a little bit tough in a lot of ways. There's one small critique that I do have about characters. So I don't know if anyone's read like Jeff Shaara, for example, or Michael Shaara, Killer Angels, Gods and Generals. There's a way of writing where he writes it from a certain perspective. So for example, in the Killer Angels, you have Joshua Chamberlain, you have Lee, you have Longstreet, you have so on. I would have liked to have seen a couple of chapters of the Confederate side. So we have all of this Union. I would have liked to have seen, this chapter is about Micah. This chapter is about, well, how is Mink not getting discovered in the Confederate camps? So those are a couple of things that I thought I would throw out about the characters briefly. So if anybody kind of wants to give their thoughts on that, or we could certainly go further down the character hole as well.
Yeah, the books with that many characters I struggle with as well. The one plot strategy he used that I really liked was how he used the conversations on base, where that's where the intelligence was gathered and whatnot. What was surprising to me was how all that intelligence was gathered at base, and sometimes they had a lot of time to talk about it, and then other times a play would happen and they would have just a little bit of time, and a little bit of Latin would go back and forth. But how that information then got back to the Union was just kind of like, oh, it just happened. I would have liked a little bit more development on how did he go back, and in some cases, in a couple of instances, the author would go into a little bit of detail, but that there was some really important information drawn in the dirt with their shoes that somehow got communicated back to the Union leadership, and that wasn't really stressed. That the details of how they went, and he went into great detail about how they would draw things in the dirt. They would talk in Latin, and then magically it would just get back to the Union. Some side, I would have appreciated a little bit more discussion and depth on what he did when the game ended and how that information got back to the leadership.
Yeah, I think that's a good point as well. I think that, and then it was kind of interesting because we had that where he was, and again, it kind of goes back to the characters where I got a little mixed up in who was due, but we had there was a character that said, oh, if you were, we don't want you to fraternize, but if you were playing baseball, that's kind of a cool idea, and then we have Scott shows up and he's like, all right, there's enough of this. Let's know more of this stuff. And I don't know we ever really figured out who shot him, by the way. I kind of figure it was the mysterious sniper that was off scene, as we read in one of the earlier scenes. So staying on the character thread, I'll throw this out there for you. I would like to know, like, who stood out to you? Like, who was your character that you really either identified with, really liked, or really was with? For me, I really like the growth and the development of Tiger throughout the book. I really think he was one of my favorite. He was a really tortured soul, former alcoholic. I feel like he was very racist, which I thought was a really interesting concept, in the fact that, for lack of a better word, he was a racist Northerner. It's kind of an oxymoron in the fact that he's an Irishman. So a lot of ways they face the same struggles that African Americans do. But I really feel like one of the things that I really enjoyed in kind of that book was, almost for lack of a better word, his coming out, where he was, is he going to desert? Well, the African Americans save him, and now he's grave digging with him. And then I actually had I put a quote in here too. This kind of, I think, speaks not only to Tiger, but to a lot of the characters and their maturation as the book goes on. Tiger felt tears running down his cheeks. Life had been wonderful for him, wonderful with Mary, wonderful as this man's life must have been the day he was set free to live as he wanted with his family. A family like the one Tiger would have had, a man like the one Tiger would have liked to have been, a colored man. Tiger wanted to live again. So it was interesting, like it's almost like halfway through the book, he goes through this rebirth, and then he goes back to the 14th, and he's like, I'm back, and everything is, I'm me again. So I thought that was an absolutely fascinating character and story arc. And, for him to have that moment of just almost, for lack of a better word, almost a religious experience, where he's in that tent with that dead colored soldier, and he's got, a Confederate button where you assume he's grasping a man in front of him, and he's got the powder in his teeth, and then his other hand, he's got his family. So that was I loved his character. I remember 20 years ago, it was my favorite and still is. So I don't know if anybody else wants to speak on him or any other characters that really jumped out to them.
Well, given Tiger being Irish, there's no mistake that the second oldest police department in the United States, municipal police department as we know it today, the first one being Boston, by the way, in 1839, but in 1846 it was New York City, and there's a reason why it was 1846. It was really the height of the Irish coming to the United States and coming primarily landing in New York for many of them. And I wasn't so surprised at his negativism about African Americans, because he was coming from that era where they were truly competing, for the most menial jobs. And, there was this tremendous ferocity among blacks. And by the time of the Civil War, by the way, by the time of Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg, in July of 1863, it's the Irish who riot in New York City, and their target are blacks, black orphanages, black anything. And, it's the most violent riot in New York history. It's a fascinating topic. But, I wasn't so surprised by him at all. I thought he captured, he captured the kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? He captured like the confusion, of him having had the experience of working side by side with blacks, on those couple of work details, where they kind of saved them in a way. And then, and then he realized, just how hard they were working, but he was, to me, he was like a typical Irish immigrant of that era, more so than, I wasn't surprised by him at all. But, he was, a tremendously interesting character and a very complex character.
Yeah, I highlighted one section of the book where Wes and Lyman are going back and forth. And at the end of it, I highlighted, it used to mean something to be a baseball player. And I like how the author captured this sense of nostalgia that this time in the past was always, greater than the time of now. Even back when baseball was years or decades old, or some still, largely evolving game, he was able to capture the fact that, we didn't play for money. We played for the spirit of the game, or to play to have some physical activity or something. And the author did seem to capture kind of that thought process that's always evolving, that the people who play it now don't play the real way or don't do the real thing. And there's this sense of nostalgia there that I thought he did a good job of capturing.
Any other thoughts, any other ideas, any other characters you guys want to give a quick shout out to, or?
Yeah, I'll add one. I really like John Burrage. He was a tortured soul, very lonely, and pulled in different directions, and really suffered over what the burden was that he was carrying. All right, I mean, he had to had to not only manage all of the games and get everything all going, but he also had to deal with Mink, for heaven's sakes. And then he has to deal with the upper echelon there, and he's caught in the middle of everything. And then he ends up getting killed. I mean, which was, just sort of like the right ending in everything. But I just saw him as just, having to carry the burden of not only the battle, but also of the game. And not only that, he speaks Latin,
I wrote this down, Joanna. Joanne, excuse me, I was gonna bring it up at the end, but in the end, was Burrage a hero or a fool?
Well, see, this is the whole thing. This is all part
right?
That's all part of being torn in so many different directions. I don't think he even knew. I think that was part of the problem. He really wanted to be friends with Mink, but he knew that kind of a loyalty would get him into big trouble if he was being too favoring to him. But then also he was devoted to the Union cause, and his mind kept getting changed all the way through the book. And I don't know, I just found him to be a complex character with a lot of complications.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm.
I think a lot of these, and that's the thing is I really, that was the thing that really impressed me as we went on. We saw these characters just grow. I
Yeah.
really feel like this book, I mean, it, what I think was really interesting about this book for me is, I mean, you read a George R.R. Martin novel, for example, right? And the man will spend 2 pages describing a feast. But on the flip side of that, you watch a character like let's just throw out Jon Snow for a moment. And Jon Snow, I have not finished the books, I have not finished the series, but you watch Jon Snow mature and grow over, 6 seasons in Game of Thrones or 4 books.
Mhm.
In 400 or 500 pages, this author did a heck of a job really making these characters grow and mature and develop,
Mhm.
and they questioned a lot of what really, they questioned so many morals, they questioned themselves. And I have a final thing I'll get to here in a moment, but
Mm.
one thing I thought was interesting is, we talk about Lyman here. Lyman took another ball down low, glanced
Mhm.
back at Micah, whose forehead rippled under the strain of sadness. To Micah, ordinary was a taste of warm cornbread made with corn he'd grown. Ordinary was the sun and mounds of clouds and folks who bound together as so would have enough, who let each other worship God as they see fit. Ordinary in Lyman's Brooklyn life had become canned corn and excuses. Irish hating Germans, hating Jews, hating Poles, and all hating Africans. Weaknesses and fear offered to explain failure and evil. So, I mean, it's really interesting because to me, it's like they just rethink their lives over and over. Like, Lyman is like, it's so simple. He just wants this. And it just gets to me like they're thinking about everything. Like they're thinking about these other people, and then they're thinking about like, what are they fighting for? What's the right way of life? It was pretty intense to me. So I enjoyed the book. So, but I don't know if anybody wants to throw anything out there and just kind of that development as they went forward.
Yeah.
What's ordinary, but um, I'm going to go ahead and kind of look at a little bit, which I thought was another interesting sentiment that he looked at, and I'll go ahead and I'll kind of throw this out. I think as a whole, what was interesting to me was, and he kept going back to these same sentiments. He went back to courage, heroism, killers, and soldiers. And what I think was interesting about that is, first of all, one of the earlier quotes is he says, this army, part killer, part coward, part gentleman, part thief, was a match for its new leader. So right away, we're trying to figure out exactly what is the army, but we're also trying to figure out the characters themselves. And I think each character you can pretty much point those anachronisms as, this character, that character, this character, but it's the army itself. So I don't know if anybody wants to kind of jump into that just a little bit, or I can kind of dig a little deeper if you'd like.
Yeah, the theme, I build on that and add leadership to that list of themes you threw out.
Yep.
There was a constant struggle, that courage / leadership, however you want to frame it. There was a constant struggle, and I thought the author did a good job of it being a somewhat volunteer army, and a question of the rigidity, the control, the embedded leadership that comes with the rank versus the implied leadership that comes with the fact that a war is going on and who's going to protect you. And I thought the author did a really good job of transitioning that from when they were on the battlefield to when they were on the baseball field. And that was a really interesting stylistic characteristic. He was able to develop that, when you're on the war field, when you're done with war and you're back and you're resting up, and this is who's really taking control, versus when they're on the baseball field, this is happening, and here's kind of who's dictating the game. I think the author had a good appreciation for understanding that in certain environments, leadership entails different traits.
I'll piggyback on that, and I can throw this back to you, Brian. I can actually, or Joanne, or both of you. But is that why Burridge in the end made his act? Was he trying to be that, like, you lead by example? Like, I always felt he was very much grasping at these straws to try and be a leader, and he led by sacrificing himself for, the defense of a defenseless man.
Mhm.
So he was
I
very much.
that's a good framing. I hadn't thought about it that way, but it's an interesting framing to present it that way. Yeah.
I felt like the entire book, to me, Burridge was just scrambling. He was looking like he had this, like Joanne, you said, he had this massive, thing hanging over his head, and he was trying to do the right thing, but he was also really, I don't think the men truly ever really accepted or respected him at all.
No, no,
And not at all.
he was not at all. He was not cut from the same kind of
Nope.
cloth as the rest of them, and so he was a little bit above them. Just by the fact that he was a lawyer, and he came from a bit upper class, or sort of upper class, but he was definitely not of the same class as the Irish soldiers, the Irish descent soldiers that were coming out of Brooklyn at the same time. And so there was the only thing that held them together was because they were from Brooklyn. That was it. Other than that, never the twain should meet. And I think that's part also of the character of loneliness, that he was at the top. He was trying to manage this, spy ring, as it were, and trying to keep the uppers happy, and then trying to keep the others in line. I had wondered about that through the whole thing, about how he was really able to keep them all in line and not have one of them run off and tell the uppers until towards the end of the story, where some of them did kind of turn him in.
It just it aided him. I have a little snippet here where he has something here. He remembered Mink's words: "All's quite dead in a day or two." His spying with Mink was not an abstract exercise or lines on a map. It was not a game. It cost men their lives. His eyes welled with tears as he faced his role in creating this slaughter. So he felt personally responsible for the bloody angle.
Right.
He wiped them clear for another look at the demon on the works. It was gone. Burridge wept openly now, and Henry tentatively patted him on his shoulder once or twice. Yes, it's a strong moment. This may win the war for us. Like Henry's like, it's all right, man. He had no idea, like, what demons this guy is facing. He even says
around with him. Yeah, honestly,
demon is standing there. Yeah, it was crazy.
And how did he keep them all in line for as long as he did? And what about the other side? I mean, were all of the Confederates in on this, or somehow was Mink and Micah and everything keeping them all in line? Yeah, I mean, that I never really resolved in my mind, about how both sides were able to keep their regiment and teams together for as long as they did.
Joanne, you made an earlier comment that I can't stop thinking about. What would the Confederate version, like if there was a companion book to this that was the Confederate plot? That would be fascinating to read now. If you could read, if he was to write a book from the Confederate point of view, it would be fascinating to read the book from the complete opposite perspective, and it would add so much color and perspective to it if that was ever written.
Yeah, I know that there was a discussion in the last book review that we did, The Blue and the Gray, and there was a discussion also about how much, we know that there was baseball north and south. How much was there? How entrenched was it, say, in the southern states as it was in the northern, for instance? And I'm sure that these people didn't, they played well. For one thing, Mink apparently had been educated in the North. And I believe they were indicated that he was educated at Harvard. Well, course, that's what do you think they were playing in Boston at the time? When you're talking about the underhand and obviously the author did spend some time looking at Brooklyn baseball, because otherwise if there was Massachusetts players, they would have been throwing overhand.
Yeah. Yeah. It
And
was
I
interesting
looked
that-
at that one when I remember seeing that. Aha! He knows the difference.
it was it only took 3 or 4 paragraphs for the first game to come together, which I was a little bit disappointed. Like they agreed to the rules like that. In 3 paragraphs they had a baseball game, and that was the only thing. I thought it would have been a little bit more challenging to agree to what they're doing, agree to what the rules were, agree,
Well,
and before at the same time you got to advance the story, right? So I get that as well. But it was amazing how fast they came up with the rules that were going.
Well, that's true. I think that was a sense of expediency to get the story going, because how much time would it take to get everybody up to snuff, on the same playing field and everything. So that's okay. And also I think that, the game itself, playing that series of games, was sort of a substitute for battles in war. In other words, I think that there was a parallel theme going on there.
Well,
And,
there's 100%. I mean, there's a couple of things, and like I said, I was just kind of flipping through here, looking at these things. Couple of quotes in the middle of the book, kind of like with that, where you've got the parallels. If you're looking for things to fight for, son, you don't have to look any further in this circle of men in that uniform. And that's what they're talking about it here. And then a little further on, we have they're all Americans, Dutchy, just like you and me. They have some misguided ideas, but not everything these Alabama boys say is wrong. They should be part of this country. Sometimes we have to be friendly and try to debate and reason, but if that doesn't work, we have to fight. As long as we know when to stop fighting, when to start talking again, we'll be fine. So you have that, like you said, it's like they're talking about the Alabama boys, but it's the bigger thing. It's almost like he was looking in a lens there of almost reconstruction. What's the word I'm looking for? Wow, I can't think of the term. Hindsight to 2020.
Yeah.
So, I do want to throw something out here a little bit to kind of wrap us up. There was another note thing that I really looked at, and he talked about, I mentioned it a few moments ago, but we have courage, we have heroes, we have killers, and we have soldiers. Courage so easily assumed the virtue of soldiers was no means universal. And then he makes a couple comments about heroes as well. On page 298, give me a quick second, let me grab it here. I thought this was an interesting parallel between heroism and baseball. If you made one great catch and 5 errors, were you still a hero? If you saved the lives of men you imperiled, were you a hero? A baseball match was not about single moments. It was an accumulation of moments, and success was based on consistent. I mean, is that not why we all love baseball in the first place? Somebody who fails 1 out of 3 times goes to the Hall of Fame. Or excuse me, fails 2 out of 3 times. So, and then I think an interesting concept along those lines is they went back between these things back and forth. They wiggled back and forth. The concept of killers, were they killers or were they soldiers?
Yeah.
And I have a couple quotes on that as well. Give me a quick second here. So we have, oops, hold on one sec. I apologize. Hello, Kendall, wake up. Let's see here. Kind of under my prior section, he says, I want to stay in the line until we could see those Alabama bastards, beat them 3 out of 5, and then shake their hands and invite them home for supper. So, but as far as killers, when I walk by a man bleeding to death, when I walk by a man bleeding to death, all I'm thinking about is eating beans. I have to wonder if all this business is just made us plain killers. So you have the uncivilized aspect of this, of the killers, of them being killers. But then they actually look back here and a little bit more. He says, soldiers know that they may have to die. They do not complain unless they're made to die for no reason. He began a short pace. When you decide there's a time you could stop fighting for justice and freedom, yes, you'll have peace. He looked at Tice, and then you will have fear, and you'll have slavery, and you will become the slaves. So I guess I asked the final question I'd like to ask is, do you think when it was all said and done, what did they consider themselves? Or excuse me, soldiers know they may have to die. They do not complain unless they're made to die for no reason. I'm sorry, I missed the first part of the quote. At the end, when it was all said and done, and I know that I believe it was Lyman talked about this when he was in the actual medical tent. You know, I know what it's like to kill. Have you ever killed a man? It's the most amazing thing I've ever done in my life, the most horrible thing. So, you know, you think of this and you think about the Killer Angels. Again, I know I draw parallels between the two works, but again, it's my favorite Civil War novel. But were these men soldiers, or were they killers, or were they both?
I don't have an answer to that question, but what I thought was interesting, my perception of how the games went on is the first game that there was still a lot of concern from the players on the field about what was going on, you know, who was walking by, who might shoot at them, who might kill them. And with each successive game, I thought the author took some of that out, and they were able to separate when they were playing baseball from when they were at war. As the book went on, there seemed to be more and more separation of that, as if the baseball game became its own thing. So to the question you're asking, it almost feels like as they played more and as the battles went on, they were able to compartmentalize that a little bit more, and what they did on and off the field, and whether it was the baseball field or the war field, were more separate from each other, and they were able to segregate the feeling of one versus the feeling of the other.
Well, I'm going to ask you this. I'll challenge you, Brian, and I'm sorry, don't take this the wrong way, but do you think that that's because baseball made him, it humanized him? I mean, if you're gonna, you know, if you're gonna kill somebody, you have to distance yourself. At least I've never done it. I'm never going to do it, but you have to distance yourself, I think, from that. I mean, maybe that's a question Peter might be able to answer with his background, but I would think you have to dehumanize someone to become, you know, you're a killer. If you're a soldier, you're doing it for a reason. You're doing it for the uniform. You're doing it for the ideal. You're doing it for the country. So I think, yes, maybe they did change it, but it maybe it made them more human, like them, both sides, really.
One point, Peter, if I could just for a second, it seems to me that everybody on those lines thought they were soldiers. It would be the odd guy who said, "I just want to spill blood." Somehow, that's what they went to, but they were loyal to what they had to do. Perhaps that is part. Well, not perhaps that's part of the reason Lincoln said, "We're not fighting to overturn slavery. That's secondary. We're keeping the Union together." That is something everyone could.
But I think the thing with that,
fight for. But excuse me, Paul. But
I'm sorry.
I remember my father was an infantryman in World War II, and he just didn't talk about the battles as they marched across the Rhine and through southern Germany. Just you couldn't get him to talk about it, and I think that's the soldier in them. They don't relish being in that situation as much as they know that's part of the calling if you're in that situation.
I think I was just gonna, I agree with you 100% on that, because, you know, I think most, you know, gentlemen that were in, or ladies that were in war don't do that, but I think their own mind, they're questioning whether they're killers or they're soldiers. Because if you think of the situation at the Bloody Angle, where you've got the man who's just, hand me gun, hand me gun, hand me gun, and the other one who's literally, his fingers are bleeding from pulling the trigger so much. He's killing just to kill. I mean, he's not killing to kill. He's killing to stay alive, but he's killing because that's what he has to do right then and there. And I think they're struggling internally with, all the characters are struggling with that as we go through the book. What am I? Am I a killer? Am I a soldier? What am I?
To some extent, when you read some of the first person books of war and whatnot, it's because of the guys that in the hole next to them.
Yep, absolutely. I agree. Some of the stuff I agree 100% with you. I remember reading an account of the Civil War, and the soldier, I don't remember exactly what, he was interviewed, and he said, "You're not scared of dying. You're scared of embarrassment. You're scared of, being shamed by the guy standing next to you because you were a coward. You don't care about dying. It's not living and dying. It's you're a coward. You drummed out. You ran." We have the one character that, really was like, he was teaching him how to shoot. But
I think that's true at a very minimal level. Fundamentally, you're taught, you rely on everybody else and everybody else relies on you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I can speak to the idea. My very first college semester, I guess, it was after Vietnam, of course. It was my very first college semester, and I took a class in speech, public speaking, I guess. And I remember I gave a presentation on military slang. And when I did that, as I was constructing it and my notes for it, I began to realize that, where the different portions of, military slang came from, and so much of it had to do with, you never killed anybody. You could zap them, but you never killed them.
Yeah.
And they were never people you killed. There was about a half a dozen different other names for them, and it wasn't even it wasn't even a soldier of the other army, which against the formal army most of the time. But so you had all of these kind of euphemisms for that, that language and so forth about, and you did those things that, in a sense, they wanted you to do to make you think you were not a killer.
Mm-hmm.
And, and maybe in a way it insulated you from that. I'm not sure. I will say this. Let me just sum up what my remark on the book is. I remember looking at it when the fighting was over, and I had to ask myself again, why is this a Casey Award winner? I found myself saying it. It's a great book. I mean, it was a very good novel. It had so much other historical accuracy in it. But I remember thinking that, well, the baseball, in a way, really didn't live up to the rest, And I don't know if it ever could, in a way, and it can, we'll see. But that was my reaction.
I was thinking along similar lines. If you took the baseball out of the book, would you not still have a superior novel?
Yes, my opinion would be yes.
Because I think Paul is right that it humanizes. It's a lighter moment within there, and it's not as intense all the time. But nevertheless, it's fundamentally a war book.
Yeah, agreed. I'm just going to throw this out here real quick, Pamela. And if you want to expand on this, I know we're coming close to the end here, but Pamela said they all had the 10 commandments in mind, even though Hebrew word is thou shalt not kill. It is thou shalt not murder when you're in Hebrew in grad school. So, and I think that's a really interesting comment. I'll just throw this out here for a moment. We didn't talk a lot about the religion in this book, but there was a lot of religion. They quoted the Bible. They did. There's a scene where he's huddled in the rain and you can't read his Bible. You think of Stonewall Jackson is constantly. If you ever want to read an amazing book, read Rebel Yell, biography of Stonewall Jackson. But Stonewall is constant. He's just very devoutly religious, and it's a commandment. Thou shalt not kill. But you're doing it. So I don't know if if you wanted to throw anything out there or add to your comment there, Pamela. I appreciate you putting that in the chat.
I think it's something that even in the war against the British, our soldiers wrestled with. Am I breaking a commandment? And they didn't see the difference between murder and kill because they didn't know Hebrew. The average people just had an English Bible.
Yeah.
But the Jews saw a
fascinating.
difference between killing and murder.
Fascinating. So we're at the top of the hour. Unless anyone has any other thoughts or anything they'd like to throw out there, I enjoyed the book immensely. It was really great to reread it 20 years later, and like I said, really put it up there with some of my favorite, Civil War type novels. So I hope everyone enjoyed the fact and fiction. We're looking at the fact of Blue and the Gray, and then we're looking at the fiction of this. So I thought that was a really nice little correlation. Go ahead, Joanne.
I have one parting shot, one way to finish it off. Anyway.
Well, it's a Civil War book. Please take the parting
Yeah,
shot.
absolutely.
You're
Okay.
from Boston. Why wouldn't you get the parting shot?
That's right. A little history will help. Yep. All right. Here it is. His name is Elbridge Jerry Whiting. Enlisted for 3 years as a corporal at the age of 32 on July 2, 1861, into Company B, Massachusetts 16th Regiment. He was killed on June 30th, 1862, while engaged in battle in Glendale, Virginia. Okay, now, who was he also? He was also a baseball player. Played the Massachusetts game, scored 9 runs in the very first official game played by the Massachusetts game rules in Boston on Boston Common on May 31st, 1858. On that team of 14, most of them were baseball players that went in as soldiers to the Civil War. They were supposedly the first ones that were in line when they enlisted, and that was one of the early dates on it. So the thing is, yeah, they probably brought baseball with them. So there you go, and that kind of reminded me reading this book, especially since the regiment, which he unfortunately died before they made it to Wilderness, but that many of them did. And so to see it portrayed as Wilderness and Spotsylvania and all those other places in the Bloody Angle, it was all where that regiment was. So it kind of like formed a very interesting literary and historical parallel for me. So there you go.
Paul, I want to thank you so much tonight for leading this discussion. You were better prepared than you thought you were.
I make stuff up as I go along. You should know me by now, Peter.
You did a good job. Well, you're very fluid. And Bob, did you have anything else you want to say?
Just next month, the book club meets with Matt Albert as the moderator with the original Louisville Slugger. It's the biography of Pete Browning. There's only been 2 that I'm aware of that were ever written, and this is the most recent one. Came out either I think it was late last year. And for those of you who they're going to the Fred, the author will be at the Fred.
So, exactly, thank you. And I'm going to expect from you, Bob, a tremendous amount of commentary on the book by Tim, But Matt Albertson will be leading that discussion. That's on March the 11th, Thursday evening, March 11th at 8 p.m. And it's I think technically titled Pete Browning, the original Louisville Slugger, but that's still a question mark.
Well, he certainly was the first great player in
Right,
Louisville professional history, and he finished in the top 3 in batting for something like 9 of his first 10 years, and he won 3 titles, even once after they thought his career was over.
And didn't he in 1890 become the batting champion of the Players League?
Yeah, that was his last title, and there were several years that he finished a point or 2 points
Right.
Well,
Somebody just did an interesting analysis on SABR about Browning's performance in exhibition games against National League teams when the two were, cooperating in the 1880s. And, we're beginning to play some exhibition games against each other, and he came out quite impressive. Anyway,
we'll have lots to talk about.
all right. Thank you very much, Paul, again, and thank you all for joining in, and it's great to see you all. And thank you. We'll see you on the 11th for the next discussion.
Good night, all.
Good night.